Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm your host, Jill Cody, along with my co-host, Dr. Pettis Perry. Pettis, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, Jill. Thank you for asking. How about you?
I'm doing really well. It's just kind of muggy down here. We have overcast and muggy, and yet it's 72. So it's a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm glad you're doing well today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our program today is Escaping the Rabbit Hole. As our guest today says, the conspiracy theory rabbit hole is a complicated place, and the people are complicated individuals. In his book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect, Mick West shares over a decade's worth of knowledge and experience investigating and debunking false conspiracy theories through his website, Debunk.org. Perhaps counterintuitively, the most successful approaches to helping individuals escape a rabbit hole are not composed of simply explaining why they were wrong, but rather using Mick West's tried and tested approach emphasizing clear communication based on mutual respect, honesty, openness, and patience. We have big things to do. Pettis, I know you'd like to introduce our guest.
Very much so. I'm excited about this show, Jill.
Me too.
Mick West is a science writer and professional debunker. He is the founder of Debunk.org, where he investigates and analyzes conspiracy theories and debunks pseudoscience and other quackery. In his book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theory Using Facts, Logic, and Respect, and in his podcast, Tales from the Rabbit Hole, Mick focuses on developing tools for understanding conspiracies and helping people who have been sucked into conspiracy theories to find their way out of them. Mick has appeared on numerous major media outlets, including CNN, CBS This Evening, The Joe Rogan Experience, as well as many news outlets. Welcome to Be Bold America, Mick.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
Oh, hi, Mick. This is Jill. We're glad to have you here. It's just a delight. And I'm thinking the first place to start would be to ask you to explain what a rabbit hole is and what a conspiracy is and why they are so seductive.
Well, a rabbit hole, it comes from Alice in Wonderland. And, you know, Alice in Wonderland starts with Alice seeing a white rabbit kind of disappear down a rabbit hole, and she follows this rabbit down the rabbit hole and enters this a new world, essentially. You know, if you're familiar with Alice in Wonderland,
yes, definitely.
It's a very strange and interesting and fascinating new world. Mm-hmm. And with a conspiracy theory, what happens is someone discovers something new about the world from their perspective. They think they've discovered some new truth about the world. For example, they might discover that, say, planes are spraying chemicals into the air, which is one of the conspiracy theories. And then this changes everything for them. They've discovered something that they didn't know existed before, and it's radically different from the rest of the world. And so it becomes a very fascinating thing for them, and it becomes a very important thing for them, and often becomes a very important part of their life. And then they start going down the rabbit hole, which is doing research, essentially. Now, research from a conspiracy theory perspective is often just things like looking at YouTube videos that reinforce people's beliefs. So there's kind of a self-reinforcing pattern to people who believe in conspiracy theories. There's an initial event which they kind of refer to as taking the red pill, which is another kind of literary / popular culture allusion, because it comes from the movie The Matrix, where Neo is given the option between taking a red pill and waking up to reality, and taking a blue pill and going back to sleep. So they feel they've had a red pill moment, and they're seeing the world as it really is, and it can become an all-encompassing thing for people.
Why are they so seductive? Why does it become an all-encompassing thing?
Well, people have different motivations for believing in conspiracy theory. Now, it's not like someone sets out to say, oh, I want to believe in a conspiracy theory, I'll go out and find one. But people are more or less susceptible to it based on a variety of factors. And one of them is simply simply having a lot of spare time. And this is something we see a lot with conspiracy theories, is it often happens to people after some kind of life change that results in them having more spare time, but also feeling powerless. For example, if they lose their job, or if there's some kind of, if they lose an election. This is something that's very common. When people lose an election, they often start to form conspiracy theories about why they lost, and you see this on both sides. You always see it from the losers. There's a popular saying, "Conspiracy theories are for losers," which isn't as bad as it sounds because they're just talking about people who lost the election. But people seek out meaning in the world, and they also seek out meaning that fits their preconceptions and their worldviews. So if someone has a worldview that is already very suspicious of the government, they think the government doesn't have their best interests at heart, which you probably it doesn't. Lots of politicians actually are corrupt. Lots of people in government are not doing good things. But if you have this very strong belief, and then somebody comes along and tells you this conspiracy theory. If you didn't have that preconception that the government was out to get you, you might dismiss it as being ridiculous. They say things like the World Trade Center was blown up with explosives instead of collapsing from the fire, or the more ridiculous theories to do with QAnon, eating babies and things like that. You might dismiss that as being ridiculous, but if it fits in with your worldview and you have these propensities to believe that type of thing, you can kind of get its hooks into you. And once you start to believe one thing, once you start to believe one weird thing, it becomes a lot easier to believe another weird thing, because you've already suspended your critical thinking faculties, and it just makes it a lot easier. So you tend to see a slide with people where they start believing more and more of these theories once they've started believing one of them.
Going farther and farther down the rabbit hole. I read your brilliant book from cover to cover, made all sorts of notes and exclamation points and underlines. And one thing that I read, though, another reason is because people feel that they know something that nobody else knows, right?
Yes, and this is something that is very compelling about the rabbit hole. The rabbit hole is a wonderful, amazing, not necessarily wonderful, but an amazing and interesting new world that you have discovered and that the other people around you are unaware of. And so it gives you, the conspiracy theorist, a feeling of being special. And there's actually a term for this in psychology. There's a measurement that you can make of this propensity, which is the need for uniqueness. People who have some people prefer to be unique and stand out from the crowd and be different to other people more than other people. And you can kind of divide people up with this metric, and you get a bell curve of obviously the distribution of people on their need for uniqueness scale. The people on the more extreme end of this bell curve are much more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. Because if you discover a new conspiracy theory and you didn't know it before, it's almost like you take on something of a savior role. The people who are very active in the conspiracy communities, the people who you see standing on street corners and waving signs and things like that, they feel like they're doing God's work. They feel like they're trying to save the world, and they feel like they are doing good deeds, and that they are the ones who know what's going on, and the other people are simply asleep and brainwashed by the media. So from their perspective, they're doing amazing things. They're actually out there doing, from their perspective, what they think is really good work. And I think that's an important thing to realize. Conspiracy theorists aren't doing it because they are evil people who want to trick people into conspiracy theories. There's some promoters who do that, of course. But most people who believe in conspiracy theories are just good people who have just fallen down a rabbit hole and got this wrong belief and now are kind of ardently pursuing it because they think it's the right thing to do.
Well, I guess they feel that they're trying to help us.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a very important thing, and it's something that you can actually use when you're talking to people. Is if they're trying to help, you can try to steer them into perhaps more productive ways that they can try to help, like looking into aspects of government corruption, say, that actually exist, or say campaign finance irregularities and things like that, or things to do with corporations and their relationships to the government. These are actual real things, kind of real conspiracies that we know goes on. And if you can kind of redirect people towards good works that aren't actually crazy conspiracy theories, it can actually help them get away from the more tenuous theories out there.
Well, I want to bring in Pettis. Pettis, I know you're at the edge of your seat.
You know me well.
I do. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mick, your work is fascinating.
Thank you.
I listened to the Kindle version on my way back from California last week, and I've explored your Debunk.org website, and I was going down the rabbit hole looking at the work that you were producing. You brought up the World Trade Center, and I have a personal story. I have a couple of personal stories that I hope we can get through today because I'd love your insights. But a few years ago, I had the honor of visiting the World Trade Center Memorial with one of my best friends who lost relatives and friends in the 9/11 attacks. And so it's become a very personal event for me, and I've tried to pay attention to what is told about the World Trade Center events, up to and including seeing, it was, I think, a multi-hour documentary about the collapse of one of the towers. First of all, how many buildings were impacted by the two towers collapsing? Just so that we can show the size and scope of the damage. And why was it that conspiracy theorists latched on to World Trade Center building number 7?
Sure. Well, as you know, the two main twin towers were the ones that were hit by planes, and those were the ones that collapsed. When they collapsed, they did actually damage a lot of the buildings around them. There was a whole complex of World Trade Center buildings. 1 and 2 were the towers, and there was 3, 4, 5, and 6, which were just around the base of the towers, and they were all essentially destroyed because of the towers falling on them. And then there was World Trade Center 7, which was kind of like one street over, just a bit to the north, and that was hit when the North Tower collapsed. A lot of debris fell against the side of that building and started a lot of fires. And then that building ended up collapsing about 5 hours later. Now, conspiracy theorists think this is very suspicious because, for a number of reasons. One, it wasn't hit by a plane. They think that, sure, they can accept perhaps the towers fell down because they were hit by planes, but World Trade Center 7 wasn't. The other thing is that when it did collapse, it kind of collapsed in a way that resembled a controlled demolition. If you look at it from a distance, you can't really see how it's collapsing because it collapses behind some other buildings. So you could certainly be forgiven for thinking that it was a controlled demolition because it looks like one from a distance. But then you've got to look at what actually happened to it on that day. For a start, the big thing that people ignore is that World Trade Center 1, the North Tower, which is the one with the big antenna on the top, basically fell almost on top of it. Very much like the entire south side, all the windows were broken. A couple of the structural columns were broken, and a large chunk was gouged out of one corner, and fires were started on pretty much every floor. And then, of course, when the firefighters were trying to control the fire, they were really there's a big problem in that they were also trying to deal with the collapse of the Twin Towers as well. So nobody was actually in World Trade Center 7 at this point. It was an empty building. Everyone had been evacuated. And so their priority was trying to rescue people who were trapped under the rubble of the main collapses. And another thing that happened was that the water main got broken, so they couldn't actually fight the fire very effectively. So they ended up just withdrawing from the perimeter and letting it burn, essentially. And then about 5 hours after it was initially set on fire by the collapse of the other tower, it collapsed. Now, there's a whole organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and they are people who became convinced that World Trade Center 7 was some kind of controlled demolition, and they do lots of detailed analysis, which is well-meaning again on their part. They think they are doing good work, but it's basically just flawed misunderstanding of what's actually going on. And the actual collapse itself is actually quite complicated, and also impossible to tell exactly what happened because we can't see inside the building. So we have to use computer models and some inference to try to figure it out. And they think they found little errors in that analysis, and they try to bring them up, and they're still doing it. They're still doing it now, even over 20 years after the event. They still think that it's suspicion. They're bringing lawsuits, and they're bringing out the victims, and they're parading them in front of cameras
and putting them through that emotion. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. Our topic today is Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and we're speaking with Mick West, who is the author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole: How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. And he's also founder of Debunk.org. I'm your host, Jill.
Hello, K-Squid listeners. I'm Tom Hartman, and each weekday at 4 p.m., I bring you a different perspective on the news than you're likely to hear on most media outlets. Please join me on KSQD Santa Cruz, your ink spot on the dial for the Tom Hartman program, heard now for the first time ever in the Monterey Bay area at 90.7 FM, weekdays at 4 p.m. That's Progressive Talk and Conversation with me, Tom Hartman, weekdays at 4 p.m. on KSQD 90.7 FM. Tag, you're it.
We're back, and we're listening to our bold guest and professional debunker, Mick West. So, Mick, another thing that has been in the news lately and has always been enticing to people are UFOs. They're always a fun topic, and there are so many conspiracy theories. Would you just take a minute or two and tell us about UFOs?
Sure. Well, UFOs have been kind of part of American culture since 1947, which is when the first flying saucers were actually sighted. And then in 1948, we had the Roswell incident, where people thought that a flying saucer had crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. And this was the start of what we see as UFO culture in America and to some extent worldwide. And it's really been very similar ever since then. If you go back to the 1950s and you look at magazines like Popular Mechanics, this is 70 years ago now, you will see them talking about UFOs. And you could read an article about UFOs from 1950, literally any time back then, and it would sound almost exactly the same as a modern article on UFOs. People will say, we are about to discover the truth about UFOs. And they'll say, what is the government covering up? Why hasn't the government explained what they know about UFOs? We think that UFO disclosure is going to happen anytime. So UFOs is essentially an eternally optimistic conspiracy theory. The people who believe in the UFO conspiracy theory, which is that the government is covering up some evidence of alien encounters. The people who believe in that are people essentially who they kind of want science fiction to come true. They think that UFOs represent a wonderful thing, and they are unhappy that the government is covering it up in this conspiracy theory. But this is exactly the same type of thing that they have been saying for the last 70 years, and very, very little has actually changed in the world of conspiracy, in the world of UFOs. One big thing that has changed is that people have started carrying around extremely high-resolution cameras everywhere they go. An iPhone now, the default iPhone or an Android phone, is very, very high resolution. I mean, it's better than most movie cameras from back in the 50s. And there's lots of people carrying around cameras with long zoom lenses, even cell phones. But the quality of UFO photos and UFO videos actually seems to have got a bit worse. Because if you can actually identify something with your camera, it then it becomes an identified flying object. And the UFOs, they tend to be things like blurry blobs or just bits of lights in the sky and things like that. So it's kind of a very telling thing, I think, that we haven't had better photos and better videos, even though we have literally 1,000,000 times camera power out there in people's pockets.
Well, I know Pettis is dying to ask you a question about UFOs. So, Pettis, over to you.
Thank you. When I was a high school, I was standing outside. I hope you don't think I'm a quack here when I tell you my story. But I was standing outside in Berkeley, and it was a very foggy night where the fog was down to street level. And I happened to look up, and there was something that flew overhead that I can't explain. It was triangular shaped. It was moving at a very slow rate, and we lived in the flight path of Alameda Naval Air Station. So we always had either helicopters or airplanes flying over, and you could hear the noise. But this night, I couldn't explain what I saw. And many years later, I saw a photo that was talking about UFOs, and the object looked similar to what I remember as a child. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about what people think they see in the sky when they see things that they fully can't explain. And albeit in my experience, it was foggy, so I couldn't make out the details, and it was well before cell phone technology.
Yeah, well, I think an important point again with UFOs is that the people who have these UFO encounters and tell people about them, are being honest. I mean, you are being honest here, obviously, about your own experience. And most of the people who have some kind of UFO experience are honestly saying that that's what they perceived happening, or that's what they remember happening. The problem is, it's very, very difficult to take an eyewitness account and kind of reverse engineer that and try to figure out what actually happened. There's been lots of kind of UFO studies where people kind of go through all the different UFO events and try to investigate them and separate them into identified ones and unidentified ones. And a lot of them, when you actually do some investigation, you can actually figure out what was going on. But a lot of them you can't, because if all you have is an old memory, sometimes these memories, like yours, are decades old. It's very difficult for one to determine how accurate the original perception was. You don't know like how well this person actually saw the thing, because they've been retelling the story over and over again for many years, and eventually you're not really remembering exactly what happened. You're kind of remembering your own retelling of it, and memory can change over time. There's been a lot of study into false memories. There's a famous researcher, Elizabeth Loftus, has written about this, and she did research where she found that it was actually remarkably easy to implant false memories into people's brains, either deliberately or accidentally. So sometimes people's recollection of these things might not be the same as the recollection that was just hours or minutes after the event happened. And then there's all kinds of visual illusions. We get triangles mentioned a lot, but any three lights in the sky that are moving roughly in the same direction are going to be perceived as a triangle. And then there's also a lot of planes that have kind of a triangular configuration of lights. And there's even one, I think it's the DC-8, which has this triangular configuration of three white lights and then a red light in the middle. And that's obviously just a plane, and the lights are on the wings. But if you can't see it, you can't see the plane because it's dark, you just see the lights, your brain kind of fills in the gaps. It's this very classical illusion where if you're presented with kind of incomplete information, your brain will kind of join the dots, so it'll fill in the blank space. So what's actually just three lights, and perhaps one in the middle, gets perceived as a solid triangle, when it's actually just, say, the lights on the edges of something like the wings, and it's not a triangle at all. So there's a large combination of factors that make it very, very difficult to do much with eyewitness accounts. So all I would say with most people when they bring them up is that I believe you're telling the truth, but I can't really get a good explanation. I could possibly give a few hypotheses that won't sound very good to you, but there's not a lot you can do with it. So I prefer to focus on things like videos and photos.
So what about the footage that's come out recently from fighter pilots or airline pilots that last I heard the government was ostensibly beginning to look at?
Sure.
Is there any evidence?
Well, yeah, the videos that came out are actually legitimate videos of unidentified objects from the U.S. government, which sounds great if you believe in the UFO conspiracy theory that they're finally releasing something. But if you look at them, they really are not very good videos. There's three ones that came out a couple of years ago, and they're black and white, they're very grainy, they're very low resolution, and they just show basically black blobs, dark blobs, fuzzy blobs in the distance, and you can't really tell what they're doing. There's one that looks like it's a flying saucer, and it looks like it's kind of rotating on its edge, but I did a bunch of research on that, and I think that the rotation is actually just an artifact of the camera, which is quite a complicated thing to get across to people. And it's interesting that there are actually explanations for a lot of these videos that are quite complicated. So people actually prefer the explanation that sounds simpler. So they say, oh, well, it's more likely that it's something like an anti-gravity craft, possibly from aliens, when the actual explanation is a kind of a complex sequence of events and the geometry of the camera and things like that, which is very difficult to talk about. So it's like it's kind of again, the fun of the conspiracy theory, the fun of UFOs is something that kind of sustains it, because people really want to believe. And I would love it if we did find evidence of aliens, but the UFO fans are very predisposed to a certain interpretation of things.
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and I think this is a good time to take our break, because my next question will take more than a minute. So if you're just joining us, our topic is Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and we're speaking with Mick West, author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. He is also host of the podcast Tales from the Rabbit Hole. Mick is a founder of Debunk.org. Visit Debunk.org to wrap your mind around the conspiracies he's had to debunk. Pettis and I would like to add you to our news group, and you may do so by texting Be Bold America at 22828. Text Be Bold America at 22828. Our list is growing, so thank you. We'll be right back with our bold guest, Mick West, right after Jim Hightower explains how Lewis Powell's manifesto has come alive today through the corporate conspiracy of the court. If you don't know who Lewis Powell is, look up Lewis Powell Memo or Manifesto. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Usurping the fundamental rights of women to control their own bodies, authorizing corporate giants to buy our elections, nullifying the rights of organizers to talk to workers about unionizing. Who is rigging America's legal system against workaday people? The Supreme Court's right-wing extremists, that's who. Just a handful of aloof, unelected judges have been turning what's supposed to be a citadel of justice into an unrestrained political instrument for instituting autocratic, plutocratic, theocratic power over us. If that sounds like a coup, it is. A slow-motion power grab has quietly been underway for years, with a core group of corporate billionaires and far-right-wing political operatives working with practically no media exposure to stack federal and state courts with partisan activists. There's even a smoking gun revealing this plot. A confidential memo to the Chamber of Commerce, written in 1971 by Lewis Powell, a corporate lawyer and consigliere for Big Tobacco. Powell lamented that corporate citizens like tobacco giants do not have enough power over the nation's political system. That was absurd, of course, but Powell was dead set on returning America to pre-New Deal days when corporate barons were the supreme domineering force over America's government, economy, and society. To get there, Powell's memo noted that, quote, with an activist-minded Supreme Court, the judiciary may be the most important instrument for social, economic, and political change, by which he meant structural changes that empower moneyed interests. Just 2 months after Powell sent his memo, President Nixon awarded him a seat on the Supreme Court. This is Jim Hightower saying, after decades of political maneuvering by ideologues, billionaires, and front groups, we now have the Supreme Court corporations want. Powell's memo has literally come to life. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. Our topic today is Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and we're speaking with Mick West, author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and also founder of Metabunk.org. Visit Metabunk.org to read more. Now, the question I was going to ask you next, Mick, was on QAnon. I was just astounded how fast that conspiracy theory spread in this country, but also worldwide. What are your thoughts about QAnon's effect then and now and maybe in the future?
Well, yes, QAnon is a fascinating conspiracy theory, and when it first came up, I kind of dismissed it because I thought it just seemed a bit too ridiculous for many people to latch onto it. You know, the basis of the theory is that the United States is being secretly run by a cabal of satanic pedophiles who torture children for drugs from their brain, which will make people remain young. And there's a bunch of other stuff there which is quite ridiculous. So initially I thought it was too silly, but it turns out I think of conspiracy theories as being kind of like a virus, and some viruses do better than others. But what happens with viruses is they mutate and they change, and then the best viruses survive, and then the worst viruses fade away. And QAnon was kind of like just the best conspiracy virus. It developed kind of a way of immunizing itself against fact-checking. You think back to some of the diseases of the last 30 plus years, like AIDS. The scary thing about them was that they got around the body's natural defenses, and QAnon kind of got around the brain's natural defenses by essentially coming up with a system of excuses for everything. If you go back and look at QAnon, back in when it was starting, back in 2017 and 2018, they were making a whole bunch of predictions, or Q, the supposed person who was behind the scenes, was making a bunch of predictions. One of the very first ones was that Hillary Clinton was going to be arrested. And then they said that John Podesta would be arrested. And then they said that there was going to be a mass wave of arrests where lots and lots of people would be arrested. And then there's going to be very specific things like a car bombing in London was going to happen in 2018. And then there was going to be a smoking gun video of Hillary Clinton torturing children was going to be released in 2018, and then lots and lots of other things. And none of this actually happened.
That's right. Nothing happens, and yet
they continue to believe, because what happens is Q explains away all of these things that didn't happen as being necessary disinformation. So
my goodness.
Once you incorporate the idea of necessary disinformation into your worldview, then everything is allowed to make sense, even though it doesn't. So they kind of found a way around the traditional approach to talking about conspiracy theories, which is fact-checking. And they said, well, of course, if you do fact-checking, some of these things are not going to be true, because that's the way things have to work. And it is this kind of it was described as being a self-sealing quality, that the conspiracy theory doesn't have any holes in it, because the holes are part of the conspiracy theory. And if you point out that there's a hole, they just say, "Oh yeah, of course, that's just the way it has to be." But I think that kind of worked for a while, and it will continue to work for perhaps a core group of people. But a lot of people did eventually get disillusioned with QAnon, and I don't think it's quite as popular now as it was back then. But it's very, very popular with the more hardcore conspiracy theorists.
So I guess what you're saying, when they come up with an answer why something doesn't happen, that's what you mean by how QAnon got around the brain's natural defenses?
Yeah, it's with conspiracy theorists, people like to do research. And now, in traditional conspiracy theories, there is this kind of confirmation bias thing where they will only look for confirming evidence, and if there's some disconfirming evidence, they'll just kind of ignore it. But with QAnon, you don't even have to do that. You can just basically say everything is part of the plan. And if you have faith, and it's very much a kind of quasi-religious thing.
Yeah, and then you add social media into that with the algorithms.
Yeah. If you look at a lot of the people who are QAnon believers, they're also there's kind of a big overlap with evangelical Christians. And then, like as you say, you have the algorithms kind of feeding the same type of thing to people.
Pushing them down the rabbit hole farther. Yeah,
this is something that was much more of a problem back in 2017, 2018, when this was starting, and going all the way up to 2020, really. But recently, the big media companies like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook have actually been doing better job, not a perfect job, but a much better job of kind of identifying disinformation, things like QAnon, and basically removing it from the algorithm so it doesn't get shown to people.
There's a little bit of hope there. There is,
but there's also, for some people, that can be something that they see that as being part of the plan. They see it as evidence that what they were doing was correct if it has to be suppressed. So then they go to other websites, and you get this kind of a starker division. So I'm not really sure whether it's on balance a good thing. I mean, I think I probably would still do it on balance, but there's certainly a downside in that you get a much more stark divide.
And you get more zealots in that area.
Yeah, you will get more zealots because they are even more isolated from reality. A big part of what I talk about in how to help people is just simply having them being exposed to alternative points of view.
Pettis.
I'm sitting here just, my jaw's dropping as I listen to the conversation. I was thinking about you, Mick, as the Hightower report was being played. How do we differentiate something, and we may not be differentiating, but how do we differentiate something like what Hightower just put out in his recording, which is based ostensibly in factual statements that lead to a conclusion that he draws, from other sorts of conspiracy theories that may not be as trustworthy in the evidence, and I use air quotes there, that's being presented?
Well, I think in some ways you can't differentiate. In some ways it's kind of a sliding scale. And this is something I talk about in the book, how individuals will have kind of a line that they draw where they think that certain things are quite reasonable. Conspiracy theories perhaps to do with corruption in government or big pharma or things like that. Things that are unreasonable, and they will, different people will draw the line in different positions. Some people draw it at corporate corruption. Some people draw it at, say, 9/11. Some people draw it at QAnon. Some people draw it at flat Earth and aliens. And people believe all of these things to some degree. But I think we've got to acknowledge that there are real conspiracies in the world. And I think kind of the best way of giving people perspective on the false conspiracies is to try to get them to look at the real conspiracies. Now, this is kind of something that's kind of fraught with difficulty because people often bring up real events in history and they look at them through the lens of their own conspiracy theories, and they use them to justify that. They say, "Oh well, if they did this in the past, why wouldn't they do this now? If they were in cahoots with big tobacco back in the 70s, why wouldn't they be in cahoots with the vaccine manufacturers now?" So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think it's very valuable if you can get people to actually look at history of these types of things from a neutral perspective. But it's not valuable if you look at history through a conspiracy perspective. If you look at, say, the JFK assassinations, there's lots of very good books about the JFK assassination and RFK's assassination later that kind of explain exactly what happened and what the most likely explanation was, which is really that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And if you read the more studious and well-researched books, you will see that is probably the actual thing. But if you go to something that's a bit more lightweight, like say Oliver Stone's movies on JFK, like JFK, the actual movie, you'll come away from that thinking that he was assassinated by the CIA or someone like that. So it's something that you have to tread lightly with and be kind of careful if you want to talk about real issues. You don't want to kind of let people use it as an excuse. You've got to try to give them things in context.
It seems to me that things are becoming ever more complicated with photoshopping and creating fake videos or deep fakes where people's voices and movements can be superimposed on images, because I would have to think that the images reinforce the words.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things there. One is that's in some ways a temporary thing because it's people weren't aware of how easy it was to modify things like photos and videos. But when people become aware, then they will have kind of an appropriate level of distrust when something like that comes along, and will perhaps get tools to find things like that. But it's actually going to get a lot worse. Things that computers can do now in terms of creating things that seem realistic is very, very rapidly increasing in power. There's a lot of things now that are kind of in their early stages where you can give a computer just a line of text, like a cat riding a donkey in the ocean, and it will draw a realistic painting of a cat riding a donkey in the ocean. And it sounds incredible, but you look up things like that, and it works. And it can do all these amazing things. And so if you tell it to do, pretend to be a reasonable person on the internet who wants to explain this theory to people, it's not very far away from having robots on the internet that seem exactly like real people and will actually go around and form relationships with individual people. It's just robots. They'll form relationships with people, and they will change their minds about things by talking to them online. So there's going to be a big issue in the future with knowing who's a real person and who isn't. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed by the technology companies.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Mick West, the founder of Debunk.org. Interested in conspiracy debunking? Visit his website, Debunk.org. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Tune in to KSQD this Sunday for State of Mind, hosted by Santa Cruz licensed psychotherapist Deborah Sloss. This month, we bring you part 2 of What is Your Soul Food? There are many ways to take care of our bodies and minds and support our mental health. These self-care practices help us to be resilient when facing life's challenges. You'll hear from community members about the soul foods that nourish them. Joining Deborah is psychotherapist and trauma specialist Kara Bowman. Learn how your self-care choices can support mental health and physical health. That's State of Mind, Sunday evening at 6 p.m. here on KSQD 90.7 FM and ksqd.org.
You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Want a friend to hear this interview? Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now you and your friends may listen from your favorite podcast platform, such as Apple, Google, Spotify, Radio Public, and many more. You can subscribe for free. So, Mick, in our last 10 minutes or so, we do want to talk about what listeners can keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to empower themselves to not go down the rabbit hole and to help your cause. I have a question first, though, and that is, you were talking about there are true conspiracies, and I think that the big lie, the conspiracy theory about the Democrats and President Biden not winning, is one of them, which caused the January 6th, attack on our Capitol. And it just goes on between voter fraud being called voter integrity, where there is no voter fraud, but that supports the big lie. And then you get to the Green Bay sweep and turning over electoral colleges and 60 lawsuits that they try to get the election invalidated, and Eastman's memo laying out the plan in the war room on January 6th with Steve Bannon, and on and on and on. This is a real conspiracy. And it just seems to me that the conspiracy theories are just devouring the GOP. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, as well as the threats and dangers to our society and democracy that conspiracy theories may have.
I think you're very right there that the GOP has kind of gone downhill over the last 10, 20 years. But it's not something that's come out of nowhere. There have always been conspiracies in American culture. The word conspiracy theory was first used about the American Civil War. And there was conspiracy theories about the causes of the Civil War, and it's been part of American culture very much so. Since then, there was even an anti-Mason party in American history because they thought that the Masons were trying to take over the country, and that was just essentially a conspiracy theory. So these things have been around for a long time. I think it was almost like a perfect storm of events that kind of led us to where we are now, and really the worst thing that happened was Trump getting elected, because he's a person who is very fond of conspiracy theories because he knows that they play well to his base, and they're quite effective. Because if he says something, it gives it an air of authority. The president says something, there must be something to it, is the thinking. So it became a useful tool for him. And because he's in such a powerful position, unfortunately, all the people around him kind of had to go along with it. Otherwise, they would get kind of kicked out. So it became this kind of cancer in the Republican Party, which is going to take a while to get around.
What role do you think Fox News has played in developing conspiracy theories?
Well, Fox News, I think, sets out to provide the other side, but that's kind of a problem if there aren't actually two sides that are both true. The truth isn't generally in the middle of something. 1 + 1 isn't in the middle between 2 and 3. It is actually just 2, and that a lot of that is true with a lot of other things. But Fox News thinks that they have to present what they think of as the other side, when in fact it's actually quite often just lies.
Right. Oh my. So our listeners and Pettis and myself, what can we keep doing to save ourselves and family, friends out of the rabbit hole? What can we stop, and start doing?
I think the most important thing to keep doing is to keep talking to people. And, especially if you have someone within your family or your group of friends who is a conspiracy theorist, keep talking to them. It doesn't have to be about their conspiracy theory or about their belief. The idea here is just simply to keep people grounded in reality and having connections to people who are not in that world. And then the thing to stop doing, I think, is to stop getting angry at people and stop acting out of anger. I think it's very easy when someone comes along with a conspiracy theory that sounds ridiculous is to just be really exasperated and just say, oh, that's so stupid. Why could you believe that? I'm not going to talk to you because it's so stupid. And that doesn't do any good. They're not going to start thinking, oh, yeah, that is stupid. They're just going to think that you don't know what you're talking about and why you're being so mean to me. And then you're not going to be able to have a conversation.
And they dig their heels in further, I would think.
Yeah, very much so. They put up walls. And then I think, perhaps the thing that people can start doing is learn a bit about these conspiracy theories. Because a lot of times people dismiss the conspiracy theories without even understanding what they are about. And if you do that to someone, to your friend who you're talking to, they're going to see that. They're going to see that you don't really know what you're talking about. So if you want to have a conversation with someone to help them get out of these conspiracy theories, it's really useful if you can have a basic understanding of what the conspiracy theory actually is, and also try to understand why this person believes what they believe. And you can figure that out by talking to them. You can ask them directly, why do you believe this? What is the evidence that makes you believe it? And don't do it in a judgmental way. Just try to figure it out, talk about it together, and it can really help.
And that is the purpose of Debunk.org, is to help find and expose that. And if people have a flat earther or a UFO person or a chemtrail person in their family, that's the purpose and your goals of Debunk, right?
Yeah, with Debunk, I'm trying to figure out how best to talk to people, but also try to be a kind of a fact-checking for the more obscure types of conspiracy theory facts, which didn't really exist back when I started it 10 years ago, but there's a lot more of it going on now, I think, because it's become more popular online. But yes, this is definitely something that I've been trying to do for a long time, and you have lots of hits and lots of misses, but I think overall it's a positive thing.
Well, one thing I wanted to share under Keep, Stop, Start, and you're probably aware of her upside-down pyramid, but a woman named Abby Richards has conspiracychart.com, and she's taken a pyramid and put it on its point. And there are 5 levels to it. And the bottom one are true conspiracies, things that have really happened, like Watergate. And then she has a break called Speculation Line. And there's another where we have questions about these sorts of things. And then she has another line called Leaving Reality. And that's, things that are unequivocally false, but mostly harmless. And then she has another line where science denial, dangerous to others and to yourself. And then the top, which is an anti-Semitic point of no return, and people are just detached from reality. And that chart is actually interactive too, so you can touch on a conspiracy theory and find her source. So I just wanted to share that with everyone because it's like Debunk. It's not as deep and rich and brilliant as Debunk, but it's just a visual that is helpful too. Mm-hmm. And Pettis, do you have a last question? We have maybe 2 minutes.
Mick, if you could talk a little bit about, very quickly, the techniques, the additional techniques that you outline in your book about moving people away from conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's really kind of a 3-stage project process, and the first stage is establishing effective communication, which I kind of talked a little bit about already. But you really need to make that your goal from the start. It's very easy to jump in and try to debunk things, try to say why something is wrong. But if you do that first, it's not going to work. You've got to establish effective communication, try to learn about what they believe and why, and also tell them why you believe what you believe. So you've got some kind of shared common ground. You've got to establish some kind of common ground. And when you've done that, you can start supplying them with useful information. And that kind of depends on the individual. It might be something where it's kind of just very loose historical context because they're very resistant to more explicit debunking. So you've got to try to tailor that to the individual. But once you've kind of got into that process, you've established effective communication, you start to talking to them and giving them useful information. You've also got to, and this is the third kind of stage, you've got to give it time. A lot of people expect that if they just explain something to people, they will see the explanation, then they will move on and they will drop it. It doesn't work like that. It can take a very, very long time and a lot of talking. So don't get disheartened if it doesn't immediately work. Just keep talking, tell them stuff, and give it time. It will work.
Well, Mick, Pettis and I are just so grateful that you could join us on Be Bold America. You are doing vital work, and I think it's even more vital as this conspiracy theories just not only affect our country, but maybe worldwide, like QAnon did. And we appreciate and celebrate you and your life commitment to truth. Our future depends on it. Thank you for being our bold and impressive guest today.
Oh, thank you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mick.
What's next on Be Bold America? We will be speaking with historian Peter Shea and co-author of In the Arena, A History of American Presidential Hopefuls. On June 19th at 5 p.m., Peter Shea will talk about the losing presidential candidates of American history and why their legacies are significant, why 21st century elections are radically different, and provide an historical perspective surrounding the removal of national monuments. That will be on Be Bold America, June 19th at 5 p.m. Remember, Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now you may listen to the show anytime for free, wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your bold friends and share this information. I want to give a special thank you to Emily Dunham and to our training engineer, Eliza James, and the station's program manager, Howard Feldstein, and again to our bold friend, Mick West. Learn more by visiting his website, metadebunk.org, and get his book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. You are listening to KSQD Santa Cruz, Many Voices, One Station. Listen worldwide online at ksqd.org. Stay tuned for State of Mind with Deborah Schloss. My name is Jill Cody.
And I'm Dr. Pettis Perry.
Thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.